All right, let's set the scene. It's the fall of 1775. The American colonies are in open rebellion, and King George III is, well, he's not happy. He told his ministers when these rebels feel a smart blow, they will submit. But what happens next isn't some simple story of rebellion and reaction. Nope, this was a year of absolutely wild gambles, missions that were basically impossible, and a declaration that, would change the entire world.
So here's the first thing that might surprise you. We usually think of the revolution as the colonists just defending their homes, right? But the Continental Congress had a way bolder and riskier plan in mind. They knew the British would use Canada as a launching pad to attack them from the north. So they thought, why wait? Let's strike first. They decided to invade Canada, hoping they could convince it to become the 14th colony. And this wasn't some small raid. The plan was a massive, two-pronged attack aimed straight at Quebec City. You had one force, under General Richard Montgomery, coming up from New York. And the other was led by the very ambitious Colonel Benedict Arnold, who was going to attempt an insane march through the dense, completely uncharted wilderness of Maine. It was a huge gamble right from the start. Montgomery's advance was just a slog. By the time he took Fort St. John, his army was getting wrecked by disease and desertions. But Arnold's march? That was a whole other level of nightmare. We're talking freezing rivers, starvation. He later wrote about 1,000 difficulties I never apprehended. So by the time these two forces finally meet up outside Quebec, their combined army is just a shadow of what it was, down to only 1,200 men. I mean, they were in no shape to attack the most fortified city in North America, but their soldiers' enlistments were about to expire. They had no choice. They had to attack. The attack, launched in a blinding blizzard on New Year's Eve, was a complete catastrophe. Montgomery was killed almost instantly. Arnold was badly wounded. Hundreds of their men were captured. The ones who escaped were left freezing, starving, and hundreds of miles from any friendly territory. The Revolution's first big offensive move had ended in total, crushing failure. But while all that despair was setting in from the disaster in Canada, a new and honestly an equally crazy plan was starting to take shape hundreds of miles to the south. Down in Boston, General George Washington had the British Army trapped, but he couldn't actually break the siege. He needed heavy artillery. And frankly, he needed a miracle. And what he needed, specifically, were 59 massive cannons and mortars. These were captured earlier at Fort Ticonderoga. I mean, some of these things weighed over 2 tons apiece. They had the firepower to kick the British out, for sure. There was just one little problem. They were 300 miles away. And not just 300 miles of easy road. We're talking across snow, over mountains, and across frozen rivers in the dead of winter. Moving that much weight over that kind of terrain, it just seemed impossible. I mean, who would even try something that crazy? Well, enter the most unlikely hero of this story, Henry Knox. This guy was a 25-year-old bookseller. He was completely self-taught, learning everything he knew about the military from the books in his own shop. He goes to Washington and promises he can deliver the cannons. And against all odds, he actually does it. It's this incredible feat of logistics. He used sleds, oxen, and just pure grit to haul all that artillery all the way to Boston. Now, Washington didn't just plan to start blasting the city. He came up with this brilliant piece of strategy. For 2 nights, American cannons create a big, noisy diversion, getting all the British attention over here. Then, on the 3rd night, under the cover of all that noise, Knox's men silently dragged those heavy guns up Dorchester Heights. That's a position that overlooked the entire harbor where the British fleet was just sitting, anchored. So, the next morning, the British wake up, look up, and realize they have been completely, totally outmaneuvered. Their entire fleet is a sitting duck. The British commander, General Howe, was just shocked. His position was now impossible to defend. He had no choice but to pack up and evacuate the city. Against all the odds, Washington had won a massive victory without firing a single one of those cannons from the heights. But here's the thing. This huge victory in Boston didn't unite all Americans. We have this image of a unified people all rising up as one, but the reality was so much more complicated. This wasn't just a revolution. It was America's first civil war. I mean, just look at these numbers. For every 5 colonists, at least one of them remained loyal to the king. These were the loyalists. And look at that other slice. Nearly 40% of the population just tried to stay out of it completely. So this was not a simple fight of America versus Britain. It was a conflict that pitted neighbors against neighbors, even fathers against sons. And the divide here was deep.
Patriots, of course, saw themselves as defenders of liberty against a tyrant an ocean away. But the Loyalists, they had very real fears. A lot of them were recent immigrants who still had strong ties to Britain. Others just believed that getting rid of the king would lead to total chaos and mob rule, destroying the very order that protected their property and their lives. This quote from a Loyalist preacher just captures that fear perfectly. To them, the liberty that the Patriots were talking about looked an awful lot like the tyranny of their own neighbors. Local committees and mobs that would harass them, throw them in prison, or run them out of their homes just for disagreeing. So, in the middle of all this division, the push for a final, irreversible break with Britain was really gaining steam. The military victories, the internal conflicts, all of it was forcing a decision. The colonies were moving away from a fight for their rights as Englishmen and towards a war for a brand new independent nation. Sometimes words are just as powerful as cannons. In January of 1776, a guy named Thomas Paine published a little pamphlet called Common Sense. It was written in simple, direct language that anyone could understand, and it just viciously attacked the whole idea of a monarchy. It made this passionate, really compelling case for independence, and it became an instant bestseller, convincing thousands of regular Americans that a complete break wasn't just possible, it was necessary. Fueled by this huge shift in public opinion, the delegates in Philadelphia finally made their move. On July 2nd, they voted for independence. 2 days later, they adopted the formal declaration. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a political statement. By signing this thing, every single one of those 56 men was committing high treason against the crown. They were literally pledging their lives, their fortunes, everything they had to this cause.
And with those words, a nation was born. Not just a new country on a map, but a country founded on a really radical idea, that a government's power comes from the people it governs, and that every single person has rights that no king or government can ever take away. It was an ideal that would just echo through history.
But the celebration was incredibly short-lived. Even as the ink was drying on the Declaration of Independence, the full, terrifying might of the British Empire was getting ready to fall on the brand new United States. The real war was about to begin. In late June, the horizon off New York just started to fill with sails. First it was 30 ships, then 70, then over 100. By August, it was described as a forest of masts, 400 ships, the largest fleet Britain had ever put together. And on those ships were 32,000 professional soldiers, a mix of British regulars and those famous German mercenaries, the Hessians. This was the largest expeditionary force the British Empire had ever sent overseas. Ever. To put this into perspective for you, the king wasn't just sending a token force to teach a lesson. He was sending nearly half of his empire's total military strength and aiming it at one single place, New York City. The goal was simple, and it was brutal. Find Washington's army and just obliterate it. So after a year of unbelievable victories and devastating defeats, the Americans had finally put it on paper, what they were fighting for. But now, facing this absolutely overwhelming force that was determined to hang every last one of them as a traitor, the ultimate question remained. You see, declaring your freedom is one thing. Surviving to actually win it, well, that's another thing entirely.